Hello, my name is Dan Johnson and welcome back to my channel. Today I am reviewing Once Upon Time. Now this one was a bit of a weird one. Time has gone wild, and with Yaz and Vinda being placed into the Mori as like timekeepers, I suppose, the Doctor's only way to save them is to not switch places, but join them in the Mori and try her best to save them through some complicated time thing, and she jumps between all their streams and that kind of stuff. I mean, this episode's a flipping mess. I had to write notes for this one because it's a bit too complicated for me to talk from the head as I normally do. I had a quick look on Twitter just as I finished the episode, and there's a lot of very confused people at the minute, and people asking what's going on. Not necessarily hatred for the episode, but a lot of confusion. And I'm not entirely sure either. I don't think that it was particularly badly delivered. I think it was just clumsy. But there is lots of little elements that I do really enjoy, though. I love the idea that they've all been returned to their pasts, I suppose, or their timelines, but slightly different. And I enjoyed that aspect because it allowed us to meet Vinda properly, because we haven't really met Vinda yet, and neither's the Doctor, so maybe it was not the best idea to bring him in this episode, because it meant that the Doctor, like, at one point literally says Yaz, Dan and that lad. So I really enjoyed that kind of timeliney aspect to the episode. Even the Doctor's one I think was incredibly intriguing, and it also, I imagine, saved quite a lot on COVID measures and also on casting. I'm also quite a big fan of sort of end of days events, and the idea, not for the sake of stakes, I like to point out. I think that you can have stakes without it being the end of days, but the end of days nevertheless I think was quite a cool aspect, and the idea that what remains, which is Sontarans, Daleks and Cybermen, I believe, they've kind of split up the world, and really they're not quite sure what to do, and that's why they've just invaded, and eventually their misguided plans will eventually just corrupt each other and end up with fighting between all of them, leading to, I suppose, a winner, but at the same time, complete destruction. There's a whole bunch of little things that I thought were quite interesting, like Passenger, but something that annoyed me during the episode in terms of its plot or how it was delivered from a script point of view, was the resolution, I suppose. It kind of just jumped over it. I think we were shown like a clip of Passenger supposedly like erupting, and somehow the Doctor has used time to manipulate Passenger to activate, like the Mori have activated Passenger so that he's expanded and fixed everything, and the Mori's been replaced with new Mori. Might need to watch the episode again to understand that fully, but I felt like that was a bit of a cheat, and that's probably why that I'm not entirely satisfied with this episode. I mean, it wasn't that the resolution was pretty bad. Like, the Doctor went into the timelines, realised what the issue, realised what the resolution was, and fixed it. There's nothing really wrong with that. But then again, I think it was just skipping over it that just made it feel very inconsequential, like it was like the first 10 minutes of an episode. We'll start with the Doctor, because the Doctor had an awful lot to comprehend this week, and I think that Jodie did a really good job for the most part. I think there's many scenes when she's arguing. There's a scene when she argues with the Mori about letting her stay longer. I thought that was a cool moment from her. And the moments with the Yaz and that kind of bickering, argumentative Doctor that she has during certain moments of the episode, I thought were neat. But at the same time, I don't know whether it was the way it was written or the way it was delivered, but it did feel like she slipped into Series 13 or Series 13 Jodie. And by that I mean like very forced anger and very kind of like, I'm acting now, which is something that didn't really appear a lot in the last two episodes, but I feel like it cropped up a few times, I'm afraid, in this one. So Vinda, I absolutely love Jacob Anderson. I think he's got such charisma. I don't know whether that's because I was reading this article the other day about him in the Doctor Who magazine about kind of introducing him, and he feels like he's got a big Whovian side, and that he's a bit of a geek, and he just seems like a very cool person to meet. But I think that Vinder's got a lot of interesting elements that make him quite interesting for me. The moral high ground. That's not correct. The moral compass. The attitude. Like he tells them all to go to hell, and standing up for what he believes in. I think of really good character traits for him. It feels to me. Somebody mentioned this a while ago, but it feels to me that Vinder's kind of falling into the Captain Jack category. Little bit rogue, little bit of a trailblazer, but has quite charming personalities. But personalities, not like made of different ones. As for his partner or his love interest, I think that she did a really good job. It's very difficult to play by yourself because you've got nothing to act against. There's nothing there for you to bed yourself in some realism. You're literally having a conversation with no one, and that's surprisingly difficult to do. I mean, Jodie Whittaker is not very good at it, I don't think, because there's that moment when she's in the time thing and she's talking to herself, and that calls back to the idea of the Series 11 Doctor, as I mentioned earlier, where that happened quite a lot. But with her, I'm interested to see where she goes. I feel like I can't pass judgment on her just yet. But I'm interested to see. I think that it could be quite a sweet relationship and something that people might stan. But other than that, I really can't say anything right now. As for Dan and Yaz, they weren't really playing themselves this week. They fell into the background a little bit. So there's not much I can say about them, but I'm still really enjoying John Bishop as a character. I felt like his sort of motivation to go and get Diane is something that's going to drive him for the rest of the series, something that people have said would make sense, and it does. There's an awful lot of monsters to talk about this week, so let's go through them as quickly as we can. Daleks, they were briefly in it. I felt like they looked terrible, though. I'm not quite sure what they were going for with this. It does look like they're flying, but they're flying like that much, so it makes sense for them to be more on the ground. Was that a mistake in terms of the shadow? Because it looks like they're flying, but there's no effect to show that they are. But there's a shadow below them. I don't know why they couldn't just do that practically. I mean, you could have literally had like a Dalek come across, but I suppose maybe that rubble that was on the floor, the ground, wouldn't have been good enough for a Dalek to actually move in real life, because Daleks like flat surfaces, obviously. They were really off colour as well, and another thing that was off colour was the Cybermen for me. I don't know whether this was just me, but in terms of the difference in Series 12 and Series 13 of these Cybermen, I think that the colour on them is bizarre now. The way that they've been shot or lit, I'm not a big fan of it because it feels very clustered. Like there's a lot of reflections there, and I don't think that they really add anything to the Cybermen. They're shrouded in darkness with like a patch of light here, and I'm like, okay, but I mean, it's such a weird thing, and I can't really describe how I feel about it because it is quite a strange thing to notice. But I just felt like the Cybermen were slightly weirdly lit. As for Ravagers and Passenger, I think Passenger is a pretty cool idea. Not in practicality, but I think it is a pretty cool idea. As well as the Ravagers, I'm absolutely loving the Ravagers, as I've mentioned all previous times. I think that their performances weren't as big this time because they weren't obviously in centre focus. But once again, I feel like we're slowly developing a picture of what these two havoc makers are up to and what their background has been. And then finally, the Angels. And I mean, you can't really go wrong with Weeping Angels. Chibnall clearly knows how they work. He's very good at sort of building that suspense with them, I suppose. And the idea that you don't blink is something that is just genius anyway, back from when Stephen Moffat did it. So I suppose that's not really the creation of him. But I mean, you can't go wrong with Weeping Angels. They are just pretty cool villains. I feel like they've been done properly right, but we'll talk about that next week when the Weeping Angels actually become the main focus. But it was interesting to see them appearing today. So first, we'll do the lowlights. The CGI, obviously, I have to talk about it once again. Just, it really pulled me out of the moment. I thought, oh, cool, Daleks, but at the same time, I thought, ooh, Daleks. And I wasn't particularly happy with how open-ended the episode was. I think that it wasn't necessarily a negative, because that was clearly intentional. I mean, it's a serialized episode. What do you expect? But I would have liked some kind of closing, wrapping up of that section so that we can go into the next section, if that makes sense. There needs to be, I felt like that the episode missed a focus in that respect, because it didn't feel like we worked towards anything to get out. And I feel like that cliffhanger didn't really need to be resolved over such a long period of time. I think that, yeah, that's how I feel. And then in terms of highlights, I've just written performances. I think that if some of the scenes in a very action-light episode, I think that with that you have to rely a lot more on your performances. I mean, there was lots of cool shots of armies of Cybermen and the Daleks, if you want to say that, and things like that. There's lots of those cool elements, which I think can kind of carry an episode, but I was quite intrigued by the performances. Jacob Anderson, brilliant actor, and I think he did a really nice job with his scenes of his moral compass and what is right and wrong. And I think Jodie had a couple of really cool moments as well. You know, that speech when she's asking to stay, I thought was a nice little moment, and I really felt her anger when she didn't find out who she is. And so we come on to the negatives, and with this one I've just written one thing that kind of annoyed me within the episode, and that was a lack of focus. It felt like the script was pulling you one way, then pulling you another, and then taking you out of this section that they've just introduced and pulling you into another section, and then taking you out and putting you back. And all of that felt a bit muddled without them coming together. So I've written a lack of focus. I felt like we were just strung along with a lot of individual scenes. Maybe once I watch it again, I can establish everything that's happening within each subplot, so that as all of those subplots, you know, move nicely along, you would understand more what's happening, and therefore you'd gain that focus, that alignment that I was looking for within the episode. Another negative would probably be the way it kind of resolved itself, and it was like blink and you miss it. Blink and you miss it. We're talking about weeping angels. I should really use that next week, to be honest. But other than the two negatives, I mean, I was pretty entertained for the 50-minute episode. Now we come on to the feel, and there's still a huge feeling of epic scale, and maybe this is me just thinking too much about the short term, but it's something that I didn't like about Moffat's era very much, was they always focused on the long term, the Doctor's name. The ending to, I think it's series 6, the wedding of Riversong, I really wanted to see some wrapping up of a couple of aspects of the series, right? I wanted to see the Doctor's name because they've been talking about it all series, and especially with that gap that they had in the middle. And I really wanted to get that wrap up, and we just didn't get it. And he just kind of teases with more questions, and I'm concerned that Chibnall's going to do the same and then be forced to wrap it all up in one episode. And that's a hole I don't really want us to fall into again. So I'm kind of safeguarding myself, or trying to verbally safeguard myself against that by warding off epic scale. But it was an incredibly epic scale, and even though we have a lot of plot threads, I feel like hopefully Chibnall knows what he's doing with this. I mean, I've had quite a lot of ill faith with him in the past, but I hope that with this feels like the combination. This feels like Series 11 trial run, Series 12 was the prequel. This is the main event, and then the sequel, which will hopefully be good, being the specials next year. That's a very weird way of describing it. And just before I go, my steelbook for Galaxy 4 arrived yesterday, which is a lovely steelbook, and I am yet to unbox it because, Well, if you know me, I work weekends, and I work long hours on weekends involving mornings and evenings. So that means I don't get to watch Galaxy 4. But I hope to be able to do that tomorrow and get the video out unboxing it. So be on the lookout for that. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.